Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located. This is Dorothy Dalton from 3 Plus International. Now, I'm delighted to have with me today Nicki Eyre, who is an international workplace bullying expert. She, after experienced workplace bullying herself, she set up an organization called Conduct Change. Now, she has a really impressive bio, and I don't want to miss anything, so I'm going to read a bit of it. So, she's dedicated to raising awareness, preventing bullying and harassment, as well as sexual harassment. So she's a consultant, trainer, speaker, lead campaigner on Stop Hurt at Work, and she campaigns for psychologically safe workplaces. So that she's a member of the Royal Institute of
It's the Royal Society of Arts.
Royal Society of Art, and she's been recognised for her work in this area. And what was your other acknowledgement?
The International Association on Workplace Bullying and Harassment. I'm a member of that as well.
So she's got a pretty spectacular background. So delighted to have her here today. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you with her about was a very subtle technique called Darvo. It's a very subtle bullying strategy, and it's the one that crops up most of all when people have conversations with me. So, Nicki, do you want to talk us through Darvo? What does the acronym mean, and how does it show itself in the workplace?
Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you for inviting me to be here and talk about this incredibly important subject today. Darvo, it's an acronym, and it's based on some work by Jennifer Freyd at the Centre for Institutional Courage. And Darvo actually stands for deny, so deny that you're the problem, attack the other person, reverse the victim and the offender. So the person basically says, I'm not the offender in this scenario, the other person is. The victim, the so-called victim, is the offender, really. So deny, attack, reverse, victim, offender. And it really is, in some ways, it's a very natural reaction to lash out when you are perhaps told that there's an allegation against you. But it's when that continues that it becomes really, really difficult, because what it does is it makes the perpetrator seem more credible than the victim. And that's why it's so subtle, but it starts to really influence the way the situation is perceived by those outside of it.
Exactly. So give us some lines that someone typically might hear in a workplace situation that would be very typical of a Darvo situation.
A Darvo situation, you might say, it's almost like a little bit of gaslighting. I didn't say that. I didn't mean that. Or it might be that they go to somebody and they say, are you sure that's a problem? I'm not sure why this is a problem for you. It sounds like you're making too big a deal of it. Those kind of attitudes where really you're dismissing that person's problem, the issue that they're bringing forward.
And my favorite one is, you sure you're not being a bit sensitive? Um, that is
So
that is the one that I hear a lot, as though it's something intrinsically to do with their personality, and they need to work on themselves to change that. So it's flipping the script. And one of the situations that I hear a lot in my work, and I don't know if you hear the same, that this comes up a lot when people report. So we know that a lot of people don't report inappropriate behavior. The majority of people don't. So when someone steps up to report something, it really is a significant thing for them. And this is what I'm told is that when they speak to their line manager or their HR manager, this is where they encounter that. So talk us through what that could be like.
yeah, so I've come across people who've gone to HR and they've said, I find this language, this behaviour really offensive. And the HR representative has said, really? I don't find it offensive. Or I've worked somewhere else. You should have heard the things I had to put up with. And that's very much that you're being oversensitive. which is absolutely one of the things that prickles my neck every time I hear it. But with HR, they might say, "Are you sure you want to report this? Do you understand? It's going to be, an awful lot of bother." And actually, we find that people are saying, um, perhaps the manager has preempted the situation, and they've gone to HR and said, "I'm having a problem with this person." So by the time the person goes to report, HR are already aware and have that bias in their thinking around this person and their behaviour. And so it's, well, it's going to get very complicated. Do you know how much it takes to actually do a grievance? Or we've already heard that there are some issues with your behaviour in your team. We've heard rumours that you've been talking about this, that, and the other. And so it really starts to push back on that individual before they've even got to the stage of being able to say, "I need support." They're not being validated, they're not being believed, they're being shut down right in that moment.
I find that really, really common, and a very typical line. We've never heard that before from this team. And that's usually because no one else is reporting, even though, and in my long experience, I found that leaders and HR managers know where the trouble spots are. They know, and they tend to avoid it, particularly if it's a high earning department or high visibility role. So they tend to ignore it. So what tips would you give to an individual who finds themselves in this situation where they're having this technique put back at them? What would you tell them to do?
Think it can be incredibly difficult, because what you find is you're against you. It takes a huge amount of courage to speak up. I've been there, I've done that. I absolutely believe that those processes were there to protect me, and yet everything was pushed back against me. So one of the key things is to record incidents that have happened. It is really important to do that. However, you also have to recognise that when you are in that situation, you quite often go into a form of denial for quite a long time. And so, actually, you might not record things because you're kind of refusing to believe that you're being bullied at work. So, that's one thing. But if something does happen, try and make a record of it. And if there are any witnesses as well, make
Yeah.
sure that they record it as well. If you can do it in the moment, in that, just ask them to make some notes straight away. That's what you need. One of the key things is that when somebody receives an allegation, they go into an emotional response. And it's thought that it takes at least 15 to 30 minutes for somebody to hear something negative about themselves and come out of that emotional response and be able to kind of access the logical part of their brain again. And that's a minimum, really. What we find is that when we start reporting, everything escalates. And so people end up in a situation where it's emotion against emotion, and nobody actually understands that you can stop the process. You can stop and say, "I don't want to keep going down this formal route. I want to try something different. I want to try a facilitated conversation. I want to try some sort of resolution, maybe through mediation, restorative justice, something like that." There are other approaches we can take instead of going through the formal processes, because we know, and we've got research that says that the situation gets 4 times worse once you go to a formal process. So don't allow HR to push you down that path, because that is the easy route for them. Put a grievance in. And I think we really have to understand how much emotion is involved and what that does to your health in terms of once it gets, because it's layer after layer of harm otherwise.
Yeah. Nikki, talk us through that actually, the impact that this type of behavior has on an individual, particularly if it's a pattern and it has been going on for some time. So, I mean, I don't know whether you want to share your own experience or just someone, a client that you've dealt with, but what is the impact of that on a person?
Yeah, I'm happy to share my own experience, and it is quite incredible the impact. The bullying behaviours, it's a drip, drip, drip. It's very rarely one large event. It's a series of small events. And what that does is it starts to really undermine your confidence. And you end up going into fight or flight mode. And you stay in fight or flight mode. So your body is supposed to come out of that. We're supposed to rebalance. And it's only there to, stave off the saber-toothed tiger. But when the saber-toothed tiger is with you, in the room with you all the time,
Yeah, you're boss.
and even if you go home, you're taking that saber-toothed tiger with you. So you're on that real fight or flight response all the time. And what that means is that your body starts to respond to that. So you start to have physiological responses. So the stomach complaints, people have lost hair, headaches, fatigue, muscle ache. Fatigue is very much not just about I've had a bad night's sleep, but I just can't get any energy whatsoever. Psychologically, you're affected, panic attacks, depression, anxiety. And for me, it went right through to the point of suicidal ideation. And that's not really that uncommon. But that was a lot further down the process. The other elements are your cognitive functioning. So once you're getting into these processes of reporting, then it's been going on for so long that you find it hard to concentrate, you find it hard to make decisions. Your logical reasoning it goes out of the window. It's just not there for you. And it changes your personality as well. So I went from somebody who was very laid back to really kind of shouting and screaming at people because I just had no control over my emotions by that point in time. And when I say by that point in time, it took me about 18 months from the first incident to actually report bullying. And once I reported, that was when everything escalated and it got so much worse. And I went into the processes in absolute blind faith. I believed that the anti-bullying policies were there to protect me. I believed when I raised the grievance that what I said would be believed, that they would see there was a problem, it would all be sorted out, and I'd be able to get on with my job. And most people just want to be left alone to get on with their jobs. Mm-hmm. I was in a very senior role, and therefore what I also wanted to do was make sure, well, if this could happen to me, I need to protect everybody underneath me. And I need to make sure it can't happen to anybody else. So I was fighting for everybody in my head. And I went through the grievance procedure. We had an external investigator. And what I discovered afterwards was it took quite a long time because he was actually away for a while. And they said that I couldn't bring any witnesses while he was away. And if they did that, then he would resign and claim constructive dismissal. And reputationally, that would be dreadful. So could the investigator make sure that I didn't, bring any witnesses? And actually, the investigator never came back to me to get any witnesses at a later date. So they only interviewed the perpetrator and his favourite, and one other person who was a non-executive director who was only occasionally on the premises. So it was very, very narrow in its in the reference that they gave the investigator. And when I read that report back, having had to go back through everything and find all the examples, that was, I'd been through it once, then I had to write it all down. So that was another layer of harm. Then the investigator not really doing their job properly was another layer of harm. And reading that report back, it was just sent to me. They didn't sit and go through it with me, which is what they should do. So that was another layer of harm. Going through appeal processes was another layer of harm. going to a settlement agreement because I was too ill to go to a tribunal, another layer of harm. And what I didn't realise at the time was that was taking me to a point of trauma.
Oh, I mean, I would have said you're at trauma like way back, way before
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And each layer was a re-triggering the original trauma.
yeah, absolutely. And it took me probably about 2 years to kind of feel healthy again, about 6 years to really recover properly on a psychological level and restoring my personality. I was just a shadow of my former self. So it has a huge impact for
Well,
sure.
I'm sorry that you went through that. So, what advice would you give to someone who hopefully wouldn't be embedded, in that whole system? But my advice when I say to people, if you feel that something is off, track it. So as you did, track it, and then if it's 3 or 4 times, then and it's a pattern, then the chances are that it's not your imagination. And so you record it, you've got the witnesses, and what would you advise for next steps?
First thing I always advise is look after your health. And that's so important because if your health gets affected, then you are not going to be able to fight any system you end up in. The second thing is if you do notice it early on, don't do what I did, don't go into denials, actually see if you can find a resolution. So one of the things that we need to do is we need to kind of sense check. Is it me? Because we know that we have things that we react to that other people might not. And so actually sometimes we just need somebody we really trust to say, let me just run this past you and see if we can make sense of it. Am I kind of reacting to this in a negative way because it's me and it's just something that I don't like? Or is it something real that needs addressing? And that it's not about finding somebody who will just agree with you. It's about finding the person who will take a really logical look at it for you and be able to look at both sides. So don't just go to your best friend who says, oh, that's dreadful. It's not what you need in that situation.
No, exactly.
Yeah. And then, do keep those records. I think it's really important. If you are in a workplace that does not align with your values, if you are being asked to work against your values, then really consider whether you want to stay working for that organisation. And if you can make that decision early on, if it's something where it is easier for you to move, and it's not always easy to move, and that's why people get caught into these situations because we need the financial benefits of going to work.
Sure.
But actually, all of that is really important because if we are forced to work against our values, then it can create a moral injury. And I know you've written about this as well, haven't you, Dorothy? So that's now being recognised as a real psychiatric injury, which is a major step forward. But I think it's very important that you don't stay somewhere where you're not valued, where you're not heard, where you're not respected.
And I think I would say also that to talk to the person who's doing it directly. If it's your manager, I think that's harder.
Yes.
If it's a peer, you might want to do it with a colleague, but along the lines, look, I've noticed that this is happening, and when this happens, this is how I feel. What help me, my favorite 3 words in English, help me understand what was going on. Did you realize this was, you were doing this? Sometimes people genuinely don't know. Sometimes people genuinely don't know. Other times they couldn't care less. And I think if you come away from that one conversation, which you make a note of, then you have your answer whether or not you're willing to look for another job or to escalate it through a formal complaint. What would you say to organizations about, what are the best practices for dealing with this type of situation?
First of all, train your managers. People are thrown into management roles and they have absolutely no idea how to manage conduct as well as performance. Everything is about performance management. Nothing is about managing conduct. And it's not just about saying, oh, a manager might um, bully somebody in their team. It's about saying, how do they help resolve conflict if it occurs in their team? And we have to remember that conflict is incredibly positive. People are disagreeing about ideas that can, it's innovative, it can throw ideas into the mix, it can generate new approaches. That kind of conflict is fantastic. It's when people are attacking each other
Mm.
and it becomes personal that conflict becomes negative.
Yeah, so you're a bully rather than there was this situation and this is how I felt.
Yes.
And I think that can be much more productive. I'm one of the things I'm a big fan of is trauma reflective listening or trauma informed listening. And I think truthfully, I think all managers should be and HR managers should be coached on that because very often a situation can be diffused if the person felt heard. So this is to all your work on psychological safety. So if a person has an issue and they feel they can share it, then that helps enormously, I think.
Yes, and the sooner you can resolve something, the better. So, you know, help go to somebody and say, all right, there is a problem here, but what we're going to do is we're going to get you some coaching because that will really help you develop in that area. And you are a valued member of the team and we want you to develop. So actually, we're going to help you in this situation. It's much more positive than saying, okay, there's been a complaint against you and you've now got to go through a grievance and a disciplinary and all of those kind of things. Just those processes are so adversarial. So let's not get to them. So, like you say, the facilitated conversation, mediation will only work if it's really early in a bullying or harassment scenario. It might not work at all if it's a serious harassment, sexual harassment case, something like that. So, that's not the panacea. And it tends to be, if you look at policies, they'll say, if you have a problem, talk to your manager or talk to HR, go to mediation or go to a grievance. And actually, have some real conversations. And I think for me, one of the things we do is we say, we train people on how to have difficult conversations. Well, the minute you've labelled that conversation difficult, your back's up and you're not going to want to go in there. So stop calling them difficult conversations and just call them conversations.
Yeah.
You're going to have a conversation. You're a manager. It's part of your role to have conversations with people about what's going on in the workplace. It's not a difficult conversation. It's just a conversation. And
Yeah.
I think, when we start to frame things in a different way, we can make things more difficult or we can make them easier for ourselves. And that's really, really important. Certainly training managers, and I absolutely agree with you about trauma-informed approach. So, so important for any of these cases.
And I saw a stat that said that 72% of people in the workplace have experienced some sort of trauma, either directly in the workplace or in their personal lives, which you can't leave at the door. So I think that it's really important for managers, particularly new managers, to understand that everybody has different needs and a different attention, and they need to start listening better to get different results, and try and understand what's going on for people and why they might be reacting in a specific way and using that to modify your own behavior, I think.
Absolutely. And I think what's really interesting is that when people go into management, it's like, what's your management style? And it's like, oh, my style is this. And it's like, well, it's tunnel vision. That my style is this, and this is what I do. And having been trained in teaching and learning, obviously one of the big things about teaching and learning and training is that you have to adapt what you're doing to different learning styles. Somebody will learn in a different way. So you have to look at all different ways of doing that. And like, well, why are we not applying that to management? Management is about adapting to the people around you. It's about seeing what works best for somebody so that you can bring the best out in them. And
Exactly.
yeah,
And
And that's
so
missing.
that's the root of diversity and inclusion, that it's not treating everybody the same. It's about treating people how they need to be treated. And a lot of people struggle with that, I think. And I think I've noticed it more in hybrid teams because some managers struggle to manage people remotely. They don't understand what their needs are. Have you and come across that?
I think there's quite a few managers where it's really, really difficult. And I've come across it from the other side as well, where somebody's found it very difficult to connect with their manager. And I remember just having a simple discussion that said, when you go on the call with your manager, do you put the camera on? They don't know. I said, well, next time, put the camera on, you know, talk to them, make sure they can see you, because actually we already lose so much online of the nuances of, you know, body language and different kind of energy that you're bringing. So actually put your camera on, look at your manager, have a conversation with them as if they were just across the table from you. And just made such a huge difference.
Great.
But yeah, it's almost as if people think if you go online, you can't have a chit chat that you would have around the room if you were just going in and waiting for a meeting to start. You know, the couple of minutes while everybody's getting settled in, where you're saying, "Hi, how are you? You know, did you have a good weekend?" Things like that.
Yeah.
And they just sort of miss that social element.
And
And
I
a
think
big,
it makes it easier to approach somebody if you have an issue, because obviously bullying can take place online. Even though
yes,
I think the research shows that there's less bullying in the workplace online within company or channels, even though on social media it's increased. But let's go to now to HR. What tips would you give to HR to deal with these sort of situations differently?
so really, really important as HR. HR has to provide support for the employees, but they also have to prevent the organisation from being taken to a tribunal. And what tends to happen, and certainly in my case, was the anger at the situation shifts from the bully and onto HR. Why aren't HR protecting me? And it can very much feel like that level of institutional betrayal where you're
Yeah.
expecting, you have a reasonable expectation that you can be protected in the workplace. And it feels like all they're doing is pulling the rug out from under you. So if you're in HR, the trauma informed training, absolutely imperative. Um, if you're hearing two people and one person has raised a grievance and the other person starts coming back and attacking that person, then you need to just step outside of that and make sure that you are being absolutely neutral. You can hear and validate people without saying, yes, you have a case or no, you don't have a case. Make sure that you are not taking people, if somebody reports bullying, the chances are their performance will have reduced. Understand the reasons why it has reduced, dropped, and recognize that when you are dealing with a situation, because too often HR will lead people down the actually their performance has gone downhill, so we'll put them on a performance improvement plan.
Yeah,
And
that
that's when they start to manage people out of the organisation. And please, 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 HR people, do not rush into formal processes. Do everything humanly possible to intervene as early as possible and help people resolve situations, but also help train the managers, make sure they get the right information, the right training, the right skills to be able to deal with these situations as well.
And another point that I've come across, and you talked about, well, systemic trauma or institutional trauma, where they're let down by HR or the system. And sometimes it's also relationship trauma if they're relying on the boss or the HR person. So there are all sorts of things going on there that really impact an individual. And one of my strong messages is to respect confidentiality, because I've come across situations where HR people have not done that. And then it's that has caused yet another trauma. And I think that sometimes HR have to say, listen, I need to talk to your line manager, or I need to talk to your supervisor, and to tell them what the process is and give them the opportunity to either step back or carry on, but to make sure the steps in the process are really, really clear and stick to them.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think, one of the problems with these kind of situations is that they do have a ripple effect around teams, and you end up with a lot of rumours and gossip and things like that as well. And, it's not just that the person who is bullied end up leaving, which is predominantly the case. Often other people will leave the organisation as well. So actually dealing with it quickly, so in a really timely fashion as well, and respecting that confidentiality is so important for reducing the wider impact as well across the team, across the organisation.
Yeah, exactly. They're really important points. And what sort of systemic things can organizations do to ease the process? I'm thinking confidential counselors, they tend to be in bigger organizations. What other measures can they have?
But I think what we do at the moment is all very reactive. We wait for somebody to speak up.
Yeah.
We wait for them to report a problem. So, first of all, the big myth, you can't do anything about a situation unless a formal complaint has been raised. Absolute rubbish. Can we
Yeah.
just stop believing that, please? As soon as you know that there's a problem, as soon as you can feel that there's something wrong, you should be addressing it. Um, in terms of, gosh, sorry, Dorothy, I've just gone off on a tangent. Just remind me of the question again.
What systemic
Ah,
changes or offerings or initiatives can organizations take?
yes. So we talk about the reporting processes, and we know that a lot more have anonymous reporting processes as well. So it can highlight if they get a lot of complaints about the same person or a particular hotspot in the organisation. But again, that's still reactive. And so one of the things that organisations really need to do is they need to be looking at the psychosocial risks. So what are the working practices that actually allow the potential for bullying and harassment to occur in the first place? And this is where we really need to get to the root of the problem. Because if things are occurring because people are under a huge amount of stress because their workload is horrendous, say you've got a middle manager, they're getting squashed from the top and they're getting pushed from underneath, and basically their behaviours change because of the level of stress they're under. Now, that's an individual problem. That is a systemic issue, because what you haven't done is made sure you've got enough staff in the organisation. You haven't allowed for the fact that when someone goes to a management role, yes, you want them to do a job, but you've also got to allow them time to manage their staff as well. So, these kind of really systemic issues are the ones that we need to address. So it's the psychosocial hazards, and we've looked at things like the ISO 45003. That's an international standard on really assessing the risks in the workplace, a really good place to start for organisations. And that's slightly different to the psychological safety, because psychological safety is about being able to speak up without fear of punishment. And that's about culture. That's about allowing people to engage, have a voice in the organisation, and share ideas. It's about positive speaking up as well as speaking up when you have concerns. So they go hand in hand, but you're never going to have psychological safety in an organisation
Psychosocial safety.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
I certified recently in ISO 45003, and as a practitioner now of systems, you can see that very often these behavioural issues are a result of poor systems. There is one thing I would add to your really solid list is to have a public policy of zero tolerance, with no grey areas, and giving people avenues of raising these, even anonymous. I can't say the word anonymously.
Obviously, yeah, yeah,
That so even if they have some sort of app or reporting channel where they can flag up to HR, there is an issue. But in fact, HR should be looking at absenteeism, reduced productivity, turnover, all of these things, because to your earlier point, that these are quite often indicators of pieces of the organization where they have psychosocial hazards. So I think that's really important. But we're
yeah.
almost out of time, Nikki. So we've covered so much ground.
Yes.
So do you have any final words that you want to add?
So I just want to just pick up slightly there, zero tolerance. It's no good saying you have a zero tolerance policy, and then when a huge case hits the headlines, rolling out your PR person to say, we have a zero tolerance policy, when clearly you don't. If you're going to have that, you've got to have the actions match it. But I think just in general, train your managers first and foremost. Make sure that people have opportunities to speak up in different ways and address things early. Early intervention is absolutely crucial in all of these cases, but set really clear expectations about behaviour from the outset. Because when you are not clear about what the expectations are across the organisation, then you're going to fall into these grey areas, and then we get into well, is it bullying or isn't it? And that's actually what we want to avoid. We want to say, this is the standard. If you're not meeting it, we can support you to meet it. But if you continue to act in that way, there will be consequences.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Well, what we're going to do now is we'll add a slide on at the end with all your contact details, connect with you, LinkedIn, all the usual stuff. So we'll drop that in at the end. So Nikki, thank you so much for giving up your time. Nikki's got a big conference next week. Do you want to just this will go out after your conference, but for next year. So just share a little bit about the conference.
Yeah, so the conference is run through Stop Hurt at Work, which is our campaign to have workplace bullying recognised in law, and also to raise awareness about the harm that it does to both individuals and organisations. We've got an online conference next week with speakers from the UK, Canada, USA, Nigeria, Netherlands, all over the place. And we're going to be talking about everything from NDAs in settlement agreements, non-disclosure agreements, up to the myths around employment tribunals and gaslighting at work as well. So lots of different bits for people to enjoy throughout the day.
Yeah, well, you can go next year for sure, and I'll be looking forward to attending on Tuesday. So, Nikki, thank you so much. We've had such a rich conversation, and I'm really looking forward to being able to share it. Thank you, and have a good weekend.
Thank you, Dorothy. Lovely to have been here.
Bye bye.
Bye.